My story of the week is actually about how I randomly walked into an industry party when I was solo traveling in Miami. I was just walking down the street and I see a line and people just walking in. And this was pretty random because it was in the evening. So I knew it wasn't time for people to go to the club, but they were all dressed up and I was curious about what it was. So I walked near the door and I asked one of the security guards, "Hey, can I come in here?" I didn't even ask what it was. I just wanted to go on a random side quest. And they let me in because I was by myself. And usually, when you're by yourself in situations like that, or at least for me, people are more likely to let you in because one person is not going to make a big difference versus if I were with a group of people, then maybe they would have asked more questions. So I walk in and it was completely full of people standing around and talking. They had name tags, but I still didn't know what the event was. So I walked in and I asked someone, "Hey, I'm just curious, what is this event for?" And they saw that I wasn't wearing a name tag and they were like, "Oh, you can get name tags over there. This is actually an event for the entertainment industry." So we have local music artists, we have agents, marketers, models, and other businesses in the music and entertainment industry, which actually makes sense because Miami is where a lot of celebrities go. Miami is where people go to improve their external aesthetics, especially with all the surgeries and celebrity surgeons down there. It's a place where the way you look is really important, but also there is a lot of entertainment there. So I wasn't completely surprised by that, but I was glad I went in. I needed to figure out how to introduce myself because, again, this was a group of people in the entertainment industry, and I work a 9 to 5 right now. And my 9 to 5 is nowhere close to the entertainment industry. So the only thing I could think of that was closely related to entertainment was actually this podcast, Lush Life, No Labels. So I thought about my introduction that I usually do for you guys and the descriptions I have. And that's how I introduce myself. I introduce myself as Fatu, the host of this podcast. And I talked about how it's a solo podcast, but I also interview guests sometimes, business owners, other professionals about their careers and how they ended up where they are. And it turned out pretty well. People were asking me to connect with them. I met people who were musicians. I met other marketers that were specific to the entertainment industry. I met some business owners from Miami. They actually invited me to their businesses. So that some people, they were owners of several clubs there and they have different artists come in. So it was overall really fun and just like I said, a random side quest, but I'm glad that I did it. So, welcome back to Lush Life No Labels, a podcast about living your most luscious life on your own terms, exploring the struggles and joys of self improvement through relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm your host, Fatu. Make sure to click that subscribe button to keep up with this podcast. So, today's topic, as you can see from the title and my intro, will be about my solo trip to Miami and some of the things that I learned there. I like this topic because the past few topics have been about people pleasing, and I know sometimes that can be a bit of a downer. So, definitely wanted to bring us back up here. So, welcome back, listeners. Going to Miami for me is not a new thing. I have gone to Miami several times before, but this was my first time going alone, and it was great. When I think of Miami, or at least arriving in Miami, I just have a vivid scene in my head. It's basically landing at the airport. Not really a fan of the airport, but that's another story. Then this warm air just hits me as I step outside the airport. There are palm trees everywhere. Definitely reminds me of back home, just being in the tropics. There's music playing from literally everywhere at once. It's just a place to be, in my opinion, especially when I visit from New England and it's wintertime and it's very cold up in New England. Going down there is a breath of fresh air. And although there's a lot of excitement to going, I was also a bit nervous this time around. Like I said, I've been to Miami several times before. When I was in undergrad, I went on spring break to Miami with friends a few times, stayed on South Beach, did the whole typical spring breaker type of thing, just wild and chaotic. And since then, a friend of mine has actually moved to Miami, and so I have more reasons to go. But when I go these times, it's not some wild, crazy times. It's actually just living in Miami City, not the other side of thing, not the visitor side. So it's been interesting for me over the years just to see the things that I've done and just the different parts of the city that I've explored. So whenever I visit my friend, I'm either maybe working there remotely or I just take the time off and I'm able to just kind of be one of the people living there. So, especially if I'm working remotely, I'm living that type of life there. I'll go to the gym, I'll walk around, those types of things, which is really fun. And of course, hanging out with my friend. But it's interesting because whenever I go somewhere with friends or family, there's always a shared agenda because we traveled together and we are going to do these things together. What I do kind of depends on other people. However, I did solo because I wanted to try that part out and I wanted to see what would I personally do if I were just in Miami by myself. Really, the biggest thing there for me is that when I travel alone, I do meet a version of myself that I don't normally see when I'm around other people or when I travel with other people. So, more on that later. But let's dive into this solo trip to Miami and what I found out. One of the things that stands out to me about Miami is that it feels like a city that has many countries at once, if that makes sense. I'll explain further. So, Miami is a city, I really see it as an Oasis episode title because of the cultural richness of the city. The city is not just beaches. To me, it's one of the most diverse cities in the US, if you can believe that. When I go there, I feel like I'm stepping into dozens of cultural worlds at once. There are different languages, different food, different music, and it's a beautiful thing to see. On my first day, I took a bus tour, and it was a couple hours, which is something I realize now actually that I like doing these types of things on solo trips, either a walking tour for a couple hours or a bus tour, something that I can do to figure out which neighborhoods are there, which ones do I want to come back to spend more time, what restaurants did they recommend on the tour, and also just seeing different parts of the city. So that's definitely something I recommend if you're ever solo traveling on the first day. Do something like that so that you can get to know the place and then you can decide further what else do you want to do. Let's dive into some of the neighborhoods that I saw on this tour. So one of the places we went to was, of course, South Beach. That's where we started off. And that's, of course, the beach culture part. That's where, when I was first going to Miami, that's where I spent essentially all of my time. But it was interesting to go back to South Beach officially as a tourist. I've been there since, but I haven't really spent a lot of time. Going there with a guide was definitely interesting. We saw the Versace mansion, which I had never seen. And that's where Gianni Versace was shot. Fun fact. They showed us the exact spot where that happened. I saw rollerbladers on the boardwalk. Those outdoor beach workouts and machines, I am definitely going to try that at some point because I like to lift. But it just looks like a fun to be around like-minded people there. I saw neon art decorations on buildings. in pastel colors, just very bright, very beautiful. And one of the things that I observed actually about the people there, they're just living their lives and people aren't embarrassed or apologizing for enjoying their lives. They're at brunch, they're relaxing on the beach, they're partying. So it's a pretty interesting sight to see. And it made me think maybe the most luscious life for some people is simply letting themselves enjoy things without guilt. And that's something I think many of us forget to give ourselves, especially in the northern states. I think life can be very rigid in New England and we don't let our hair down too much. But going to some place like Miami and specifically South Beach really allows folks to just chill out. Another neighborhood that I explored while I was there was Wynwood. There's a lot of street art and creativity. That's what that area is known for. And honestly, it feels like walking through an outdoor gallery. There are massive murals painted with bright colors all over the buildings. You can't walk a few feet without seeing artwork. There's the artwork, there are galleries, there are artists everywhere. And I even walked around a little bit and went to a guitar shop that had cars in there that people can look at, but a bunch of different types of guitars that they were selling that people could buy and sort of see. And there was a coffee shop in there. There was a lot going on in that shop, but it just again was an area where I saw a lot of creativity. And when I went to this area, I felt like creativity is contagious. When I saw people expressing themselves so boldly, it made me wonder why I'm not very good at painting. I can't even draw a good stick figure, but oh well. Not all of us have all the talents, but Wynwood is a cool place. A lot of things to see there. And another part of the city that I went to on this tour, it was very long, was Little Havana. And that's really where I was able to see Cuban culture. I saw people playing domino games in the park. There were a number of Cuban coffee windows. Actually, on the tour, as part of it, they took us to one of these coffee windows, and folks got to try different Cuban coffees, authentic. I don't drink coffee. I did sip one. I thought it was sour, but that's just me. Everyone else loved it though, so I'm sure that's where it's at. I've heard good things about it. And the other notable thing about Little Havana is that there's salsa music everywhere, which I love. Very chef's kiss for me. Even at restaurants, it did remind me of when I visited Latin America with the live performers at many restaurants, which is a great ambiance. I went to a restaurant where there was someone playing the guitar and a woman on stage singing and dancing, just part of the restaurant entertainment. So that was pretty cool. And this was in the middle of the day. But what I liked also was that people weren't rushing. They were talking, laughing with each other, and overall just having a good time. Again, I think the weather plays a huge role in these types of things, but also just the culture of the place encourages people to have more community, which is great because watching the locals socialize really did remind me of how much community and conversation matter, especially with them being in their own like little version of Cuba. They brought that culture with them. And I'd say too, it's not only Little Havana, in Little Haiti as well, we're able to see these types of things around community and culture that people really embrace, which I think is a beautiful thing. So those are some of the main things that I saw on this tour, and I was able to meet other people. There were actually people from other countries on my tour, which was really cool because we all were learning together about these things. And like I said, it was really one of my first times actually doing some official tourist things in Miami, which was cool as well. Got some really good empanadas. And that wasn't the only thing that I did while I was on this solo trip there. But there were a lot of unexpected joys of being alone in public. Miami's not the only place where I've encountered this type of thing, but I think there are certainly some pros and cons to when you travel solo. I haven't actually really traveled solo in America, weirdly enough. Most of my solo trips have been in other countries. My very first solo trip was to Portugal. So it's been interesting going solo in America. Usually when I travel in America, I'm traveling with friends or I'm traveling to see someone. So I don't get that opportunity as much. But things felt a little weird at first because every time I've been to Miami before, like I said, I've been with at least one or two other people. So this was my first time in the same place having a completely different experience. Things like eating dinner alone, wandering the neighborhoods with no plan. Like I said, I randomly went to an industry party, sitting on the beach for hours. I've done these in other places before, but not here. Then I start to notice conversations around me, music drifting through the streets. One of the things that I did on this solo trip as well was I went to a tourist spot called Bayside, where there are a number of different shops there. There are a bunch of different restaurants. And then there's also music that they have in one of the areas. And I actually took a boat tour from there too, but they were playing, again, salsa music in an open space. Some people were dancing together by themselves. So I was dancing by myself there as well. And I did get looks, but I'm used to it now. When I travel solo, people are just curious why you're doing that. I think people think it's weird, which I thought it was weird before I did it, but I can enjoy my own company. And I think a lot of people might be uncomfortable with that or just haven't tried it. I don't have those types of nerves anymore, so I wasn't too pressed about it, but it was a blast there because also when I'm solo, sometimes other people are solo or even groups and we start dancing together, which is fun. And I don't know, I felt like I was the main character in my own movie, which I certainly do when I travel solo. It's not to say I'm the only person around, but everything in my head and around me is really just about me in that sense. So that's a pretty interesting thing because, of course, most of the time I'm with other people or surrounded by other people. And sometimes, like I said, it can be nerve wracking to do. And sometimes some people may feel like, oh, there's not much to do when I'm by myself. I don't have anybody to talk to. But there are plenty of people to talk to. Actually, when I'm solo, I talk to so many different people, either the people on the tour that I spend hours with, or if I'm salsa dancing, then I may chat with some of the people that are around me that are also partaking in that event. Or if I'm alone at restaurants, people that work there, they'll ask me, "Oh, what are you here for?" I certainly start conversations with them. They start conversations with me, and so it's alone, but not always, but not actually alone as well. Going to the industry party, obviously, that was an event where I talked with other people for hours. So I found that I do talk to people a lot when I go to these things. So outside of some of those maybe awkward times or anything like that, there is the beauty of solo travel. I get to be on my own schedule. If I decide I don't want to do an activity, then I don't need to do it. I can randomly go to these industry parties and do all those things because I'm just walking around and figuring out where I want to go. I can figure out what restaurants I want to go to as well. There was one restaurant I've been to before, but I went there. That might be my favorite restaurant actually in the city. I kid you not, I think I went there maybe 2 or 3 times, but solo travel to me also forces some small acts of bravery. Like I said, there are some of those times where I might feel too alone or something like that, and for example, one of the ways to combat that is to ask locals where to eat. If I'm at a restaurant already, I may ask the waiter suggestions on where else I could check out. If I am doing something, I may ask people, "Hey, where's an activity or where's something that you would recommend that I go to?" So it allows me to try food that I haven't tried before. I have the opportunity to navigate different neighborhoods. And then, like I said, also striking up those conversations, which I normally wouldn't do if I'm with a group of people. But if I'm alone, then it does kind of encourage me to step out of my comfort zone and do some of those things. And none of these things are huge risks. But in my opinion, each one expands my comfort zone a little bit, especially because when I don't know people, I'm pretty silent. So it's nice for me to be able to get some of these opportunities to step out of my comfort zone. And when I do those things, I'd say too, every tiny moment expands my world in a way. Like I said, especially because I can be very introverted around people that I don't know. I mentioned this before, but when I was at South Beach, like I said, I felt like there was really a lesson learned there about living a lush life because they live so differently from the people in New England that I'm surrounded by most of the time. And not everything went smoothly, but experience to me is better than perfection. If you've ever listened to any of my episode, I constantly talk about self-improvement in different ways, but I also emphasize that I am not perfect. Nobody is perfect. We are all just trying to figure out life. From my understanding, this is my first time living and I don't know everything. I'm just trying to figure it out. I make mistakes and then I try to learn from them. And some lessons you got to learn the hard way, right? But at one point, for example, I wanted to get henna and I had planned on doing this when I went to the Bayside marketplace. And I did go there, but then they were overpriced because it's a tourist area. And that was really annoying because in New England, when I get my henna done, I pay not that much money. I know how much the market up here. And so I was not going to pay 2 times as much just for that. So that didn't go very smoothly, but it is what it is. Sometimes things like that happen. But the diverse cultures that I saw in Miami expanded my perspective. And it really does every single time for me when I go somewhere new. Because I have a culture that's different than a lot of people that I know, or maybe everybody that I know, because nobody's really from my country or really knows my culture like that. And so I love learning about other cultures. I speak multiple languages, so I love being around other languages, whether I understand them or not. I love eating different foods and just learning about traditions as well, because it reminds me that there are so many different types of ways to live. There's not one way for us to live our best, luscious life. My way may be different than your way, may be different than somebody else in your life's way. So it's really about figuring out that for ourselves. And I will say too that when I think of a lush life for me, there are things that I can point to and say, oh, yeah, if I were doing that or if that were part of my life in the future, then that would be lush life for me. However, I'm also the type of person where I don't have like one straight path in the sense, or at least in my head. I think that life or at least my life is ever changing. Yes, there are some things that are going to continue on. However, I'm open to things that maybe I've never considered before, or I'm open to things shifting a different way because I don't know how it's going to go. I don't think life is a straight line. I think it's a curvy line that's leading somewhere. And I love exploring that and figuring out what else or what new thing or what might change for me. So I like having a fluidity in that way. When I was growing up though, and earlier in my life, I was very, very rigid, but for whatever reason, the older I've gotten, I've become much more fluid about it, which is good for me for sure to not be so obsessed with like one way to live. I get the most out of traveling alone in that sense as well, because I am curious about the world and different cultures. And when I see how differently people live around the world, it reminds me that there's no single blueprint for a good life, whether it's my personal experiences or the experiences of the guests that I have on. So, listener, you don't need permission to enjoy life. I find that sometimes we do think we need permission for that. I've been in that boat for sure. However, you can travel alone. You can try new things and you can build the life that you want. I know it's not always easy. And I know that life has its ups and downs, and sometimes we just don't have the ability to do that given our circumstances. I understand all that completely. But all I'm saying is that you don't need to fly to Miami to start designing your luscious life. It might help though. So I'll challenge you to do some small things. Like I said, I know that sometimes life circumstances can keep us back and keep us from meeting some of those goals or exploring. But I do challenge you, listener, to take maybe a 1 day solo trip. And it could be in your city. Maybe you're exploring a different part of the city that you've never really explored. Maybe you take the train to a nearby town. Maybe you don't want to really travel, but you could walk over to somewhere you've never walked over to in your neighborhood. Take a different path to getting to work or something like that. Explore a neighborhood. Like I said, you could eat at a restaurant alone. You could, or even just, I mean, I imagine a lot of people who, for example, are coffee drinkers, since I talked about that, go to Starbucks and get their coffee by themselves. Maybe go to Starbucks, get your coffee, and sit down for 5 minutes by yourself and see how you feel. There's a lot of different ways to explore that part of yourself because it's great to be around other people. And like I said, I'm around other people all the time. But I do think when you're alone, it does allow you to see how you would be or who you are within yourself when you don't have to rely on other people for those types of things. Attend a cultural event alone, something, or with friends, but just something. So I challenge you to think about some of these things that may be out of your comfort zone a little bit. You don't need to spend 5 days on them, but even just, like I said, 5 minutes sitting by yourself somewhere and just see how that is. Sometimes you got to take a leap, try it, and see how it goes. And overall, I'd say too that solo traveling isn't about escaping life. I did not escape my life, but it is about discovering how you want to live it from a different perspective. So I will end it there for today. I do want to know though, audience, leave me comments on where would you go if you stopped waiting for someone to come with you. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lush Life No Labels. Like and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Follow me on Instagram and Threads at Lush Life No Labels _pod. Cheers to your lush life and see you later.